Good afternoon, and welcome to this introduction to the newest book on our city, Lahore, A Framework for Urban Conservation. My name is Maryam Rabi. I am a consulting architect at the Arkhan Cultural Services, Pakistan, and was part of the editorial group for the book. As the moderator for today's session, it is my pleasure to invite and introduce our panelists for the day. Mr. Lashari is running a little late, so I will introduce him later, but I will start with the other panelists. First, we have Mr. Nayyar Dada. Mr. Nayyar Dada started his career as a lecturer at the National College of Arts. He is a winner of the prestigious Arkhan Award for Architecture, as well as the Pride of Performance Award, Sitara Imtiaz, and Hilal Imtiaz. He currently serves as a member of the Board of Governors of the Walled City of Lahore Authority, Lahore Art Council, and National College of Arts. He is also a member of the Lahore Literary Festival and is a founding member of the Lahore Conservation Society. Nayyar Saab, could you please kindly join the panel? Thank you, Nayyar Saab. Our next panelist is Mr. Masood Khan. Mr. Masood Khan is a conservation architect and planner and has worked for the Arkhan Trust for Culture in the Middle East, Central Asia, and South and Southeast Asia. A graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the National College of Arts, he has led the Arkhan Trust for Culture collaboration in Lahore from its inception in 2007, and earlier worked on many other trust projects. He has also taught at the Arkhan Program for Islamic Architecture at Harvard and MIT. Masood Saab, please take your seat at the panel. Thank you, Masood Saab. Our third panelist for the day is Christophe Boulot. Christophe is the Senior Conservation Officer of the Arkhan Historic Cities Program. He holds degrees from Lausanne and Paris and has over 20 years' experience in international projects related to monument conservation, archaeology, and urban rehabilitation. Mr. Boulot, could you please kindly join the panel? Thank you all for your time today. The Arkhan Trust for Culture is the cultural agency of the Arkhan Development Network. It became active in northern Pakistan in 1989 with the conservation of the Baltit Fort, rehabilitation, and protection of the historic core of the villages of Karimabad in the Hunza Valley. Through the Arkhan Cultural Services Pakistan, the Trust's country affiliate, projects in Gilgit-Baltistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa have included the conservation and adaptive reuse of several other historic forts and former palaces, as well as other sites and historic settlements. In 2005, the government of Pakistan requested the Arkhan Trust for Culture to make technical contributions to the World Bank funded area development Shahi Guzarga pilot project in the walled city of Lahore. The work carried out was initiated under a public-private partnership framework agreement signed in 2007 with the government of Punjab. The technical engagement of the trust still continues on several ongoing projects. These projects include major Mughal period monuments such as the 17th century public bathhouse known as the Shahi Hammam, as well as Chowk Wazir Khan, the north facade of the Wazir Khan Mosque, the famous picture wall, and the royal kitchens in the World Heritage Site of the Lahore Fort. The Arkhan Trust for Culture also provided assistance to the Punjab government in the preparation of a master conservation and redevelopment plan for the walled city of Lahore. This plan, mandated by the Walled City of Lahore Act 2012, emphasizes the protection and conservation of Lahore's prized historic core and the maintenance of a substantial residential population within the old city by improving its quality of life. I would now like to invite Mr. Masood Khan to tell you more about the book.
Thank you, Maryam. Thank you. I'd like to go through a small slide presentation about the book and about the work that it records. Thank you very much. इस पे ये forward करती है? The book has a foreword by His Highness the Arkhan, Prince Karim Arkhan, and I would like to read just a couple of paragraphs from that foreword. There are many today across the Muslim world who know their history and deeply value their heritage, but who are also keenly sensitive to the radically altered conditions of the modern world. They realize too how erroneous and unreasonable it is to believe that there is an unbridgeable divide between their heritage and the modern world. There is clearly a need to mitigate not what is a clash of civilizations, but a clash of ignorance, where people of different faiths or cultural traditions are so ignorant of each other that they are unable to find a common language with which to communicate. Further on in his foreword, His Highness alludes to the actual collaboration between the Walled City of Lahore Authority, and I welcome Mr. Lashari, who heads, he's the Director General of the Walled City of Lahore Authority. And His Highness goes on to say that working in the Walled City of Lahore, the Arkhan Trust for Culture has engendered a significant transfer of competencies, demonstrating that the ancient heritage of the city is not something to be swept aside in favor of commercially driven modernity. It is, rather, a source of strength and a value for the future. By improving living conditions and beginning to heal the historic urban context and the monumental heritage of this unique site, a step in the right direction has been taken. Pride born of an ancient civilization is progressively replacing substandard living conditions and deteriorating monuments. And, most importantly, this effort is now being led by local government and residents. The book has 5 main chapters. There's the introduction, which contains the foreword I just read you from, and Mr. Lashari has also an introduction in it, and then there is a section called Greater Lahore and the Walled City, which introduces the urban context at large. Then there are 2 sections about chronicling the Arkhan Trust for Culture initiative in Lahore. Then a major part of the book is devoted to a new master plan for the Lahore fort, which was completed last year before last. And the last section points to the way forward. So, this is a map of Lahore, and that is, sorry. So that's a map of Lahore, and the thick line around it is the ring road. The broken lines are railway tracks. The green lines are your new rapid transport services, the bus rapid transport and the orange line. And the black patches are the 2 airports, the major airport and the Walton airport. And the colors basically tell you that across the canal on the northeast side of the city are the underserviced and marginal locations where Lahorites live. And the orange, the sharp orange is the colonial period Lahore, whereas the pale orange is where Lahore has expanded in the last 70 years. As you can see, in 1947, Lahore might have been about 500,000 people. Now it is 11.2 million people by the 2017 census. The walled city is at orange blob in the northwest of the city, and that's the walled city. And it is in the heart of the most fraught and difficult circumstances that a historic urban core can ever imagine to be existing. And it is surrounded by as you can see, that blue area is by commerce, which caters to this 12 million strong city as a whole. Why that strong commerce should exist around the historic core, it has a lot of historic reasons that you will read about in the book. But these pressures are suffocating and killing your historic city. This is something that's touched upon in the book, but it also needs to be grasped and actively, this fact has to be cultivated actively by bureaucrats and planners, and the fate and the future of the walled city needs to be brought into the larger planning framework of the city for the future. It has not happened yet, this kind of planning, integrating historic territory and the history of the city as a whole with new developments and the lay of the city as we currently experience. Because history and the past of the city affects the way you plan a city and the way you make a city develop into the future in very, very profound ways. And if you're not wary enough, if you're not careful enough, then you deal with things that are often quite irreparable. So this is the walled city with the Badshahi Masjid in the background. Now, one of the things that is interesting about the walled city, and I'm going to read some bits of the introduction to the walled city in the book. The cultural values of the historic core of Lahore are noteworthy. The events of 1947 and the scars they left on the walled city notwithstanding, the complex structure of the urbanism and the history written into its very form and structure is significant. Exceptionally, it is one of those rare historic cities whose form and identity are markedly visible on city maps. This distinction from its surroundings is facilitated by circular garden and circular road and by the urban areas around it that arose mainly in the British period. The city offers innumerable opportunities to represent the notion of a historic urban landscape, from the point of view of cultural authenticity as well as its placement within a spatial and historical context. Spread all around the city are evidences of Greater Lahore in the 17th century, the time of the city's historical zenith. These monuments and remains of gardens represent a continuum of change and transformation that has become Lahore's history. Within the perimeter of the walled city are labyrinthine networks of streets and bazaars, the atmospherics created by groups of late 19th and early 20th century buildings are evocative and mesmerizing. As in many other historic cities, the names used for some of the retail bazaars and certain neighborhoods and lanes often refer to merchandise, occupations, or professional services that may not exist anymore. Still surviving are 700 individual historic buildings that complete the physical environment of those passageways. Many of these buildings strike one as architecturally and artistically valuable in their own right, but many are clustered together and possess group value. There are thousands more that once the crude plaster renders, modern repairs, and concrete projections are removed, are highly likely to reappear in their historic authenticity as the urban rehabilitation continues. Embedded in this historic fabric are many monumental artifacts, large and small mosques, temples, squares, havelis, and gates. On the walled city's northwestern corner is the World Heritage Site of Lahore Fort, the ancient citadel. Their future, as well as the future of the ordinary historic urban fabric, depends as much on expert attention and care at appropriate standards of conservation as on serious political will, the proper enforcement of law, and on municipal governance specially tailored to a historic city. In 2008, a year after we started working in Lahore, we prepared a strategic plan for the walled city, which basically spelt out the essential trajectories of the work that we were going to do. First of all, it was preventing further erosion of the heritage, spatial relocation of economic functions without impacting economic diversity, tapping heritage as catalyst for rehabilitation, assisting the resident communities within the walled city to participate in and benefit from the area's new development, and advancing priority environmental upgrade proposals in coordination with the central and greater Lahore areas. Now, I would like to just focus a little bit more on the last bit, because this again points out a very essential thing that is often looked over, that when you're planning for the walled city, you cannot miss out on the planning for the central areas of Lahore and relate it to how the greater Lahore planning process is impacting. We also, one of the things that we did to begin with was to document the walled city. And the walled city has 130 kilometers of lanes and roads. I think it's 130 miles, if I'm not mistaken, of lanes and roads and tiny ruelles. And to document this was a Herculean task properly using modern electronic instruments. But we did it over a period of 3 years. Then there were detailed documentation of the areas that were being upgraded and proposals drawn up for intervention. There was also a documentation of the socioeconomic status, and a baseline study was carried out. Then there was, this is very interesting, we had an engineering firm, an international engineering group, prepare an integrated development plan for the infrastructure of the walled city. Now, what that means is that there are 5 or 6 major services that are provided to the walled city. There's water, electricity, sewerage, rainwater disposal, gas, and telecom. All these have to be planned in conjunction with each other, so that you're not tearing up the roads and streets after one, you've done one, and the other, which happens all the time in Lahore. So in those tiny, tiny streets and little sort of nooks and corners, we have to carry out the infrastructure development in an integrated manner so that everything is done more or less together. So as a result of that, a phased development program was created. So each of these areas on the map is where an integrated development plan for all those 6 services was prepared. And of those, the area which is called, which you see as described as pilot project, is already finished. Number 2 is being prepared, and I believe it is, the PC1's been approved and it's going to be launched very shortly, and the rest will follow. But these are Herculean tasks because the pilot project took about 2 or 3 or 4 years to complete, but we've learned a lot of lessons from it, and hopefully this next project, Project 2, will be carried out in a much faster manner. What it also involves is that it's not just pipes and services and water supply and sewerage, it's also the buildings that these services supply and the people who live in those buildings. We were able to demonstrate in a small area how you could work with the people, you could examine the problems that people are facing, work with community organizations, and identify those problems that affect the people on the one hand, and those problems that also affect the prospect of conservation of these buildings, which constitute the urban fabric of the walled city. So the important thing here is to understand the city as a fabric. And each little plot and each little building on it constitutes the tana and bana, the wap and the weft of the fabric. And if you comprehend what you're working with in that manner, then it's almost like the way you darn a very precious piece of fabric. And without what you're doing affecting its essential existential qualities and its historic character and its architectural and aesthetic and historical and cultural values. So this is the area of the Shahi Guzargah project, and I'll just rush through these slides. Community participation and discussing with the people. Often we had to enter the homes and redesign the way these people lived in these homes so that the facades could be exposed after removing the concrete bathrooms that people had built on the facades, and designing new bathrooms in the interior of the houses to their satisfaction. Then there is the major infrastructure work in the city as a whole. And then the results of some of the work that were done in the houses themselves. The next stage was a stage where we carried out integrated planning and monument conservation, of which the first thing was a master conservation and redevelopment plan. And this was mandated by the new Walled City of Lahore Authority Act, Walled City of Lahore Act, under which the Walled City of Lahore Authority was established. And the act actually mandates, I think this is a very rare thing in Pakistan for a municipal act to actually mandate and spell out the manner in which a plan for the city should be prepared. So in this particular act, the Master Conservation and Redevelopment Plan required many different components to be prepared, chief of which were a new land use plan and a plan for conservation of heritage, the heritage of the whole city, and of course an infrastructure development plan. Let me see if I've missed anything of importance. Yeah, one of the important things is the third item here, is that the external pressures and the threats they impose on the walled city must be mitigated and negative developments should be identified and contained. Now there's a lot in these three lines. The external pressures are basically those pressures that are historical of nature and that were brought about by the presence of major inter-regional transportation functions which historically huddled around the city. And the first one of them is the railway station, but this is followed by the Crown Bus Adda and the Badami Bagh and then the trucking and what is now the major hub of the metropolitan trucking and goods movement business which exists around the walled city. We have, from start, we have been agitating for the removal of some of these functions, and we've succeeded insofar as there is one major terminal that's now been built at the end of the canal in Niyaz Beg, Tokan Niyaz Beg, that area. But there are others proposed also. So these are the sort of things that will mitigate pressures, and ultimately the forces that are drawing these negative pressures on the city, we hope will be attenuated. Then there are rules and regulations, traffic conditions, conditions congenial for tourism to play its role in the economic future of the city. And a continuous stream of adequate funding must be maintained from appropriate sources to fulfill these aims. And we think that political will is the most important aspect of this. The land use plan essentially looks like a very ideal piece of planning because it does away with some of these major markets and so on. But this is something that is projected for the next 25 odd years. And there are mechanisms built in this in which things are likely to be encouraged to move out, and other mechanisms such as what is known as approved and non-conforming and non-conforming land use in the plan. So what we're trying to take the walled city to is a balance of the residential and the commercial. And then what happens in various in the hierarchy of bazaars, what happens in various bazaars, like the main bazaars or the secondary bazaars, or the kind of commerce that happens in the smallest little gully in the walled city, little fruit shop or a phone repair shop and so on. So if we can achieve this kind of balance, then we have a better land use plan than what exists now. The other major important thing was the identification of what we called zones of special value, of which the zone occupying or including the Lahore Fort and the Badshahi Masjid is the principal one. It's a big patch on the upper side of this map. But then also within the walled city, there are areas that are more precious than the others. And we've identified them, and we have the plan kind of advocates a way of dealing with these zones of special values, recording them, analyzing them, preparing projects for them, and so on. This is an example of how you can record the internal fabric of the walled city. And some before-after pictures. This is the looking down at the Chowk Wazir Khan. And this you must be very familiar with, the Hammam. So the next more important thing, and now the most important thing we are tackling, is the Lahore Fort itself. And for this, an upgrade of a master plan was prepared. We had a master plan that was done in 2006 under UNESCO auspices, but this is more of a what to do with it kind of a master plan. In this master plan the book has several chapters relating to the master plan, involving, the first is, of course, the history, context, and the monumental area and its buffer zone. The second is the 2018 master plan for the Lahore Fort, and the review and analysis of conditions. This is a very, very interesting chapter in which what appears so obvious to us, Jahangir quadrangle, Akbari quadrangle, Shah Jahan's quadrangle, and so on, which have always existed as a kind of simple table that the archaeology department back in the days, in the 50s, had established. But if you look harder, you find that it is not so simple, that these things overlap each other, and you find evidence of things built by Jahangir, removed by Shah Jahan, things started by Jahangir, built over by Shah Jahan, and then added to by Shah Jahan, and so on. And what happened to Akbar's old palace, that too is revealed in this book. Also, to inform you, the Akbar's old palace had predecessors that are now coming to the surface, what was in the fort before Akbar. So this is an ongoing process, and Lashari Sahab might like to shed some light on it later, but I'll just go through very quickly. Then another very important thing is what happens to the rain that falls on the fort, and how does it damage the fort's fabric. And so overhauling the drainage system and reestablishing the historic landscape is a very, very important aspect that's being taken up. Then picture wall, the picture wall has been conserved. The western side of the picture wall, as you probably know, has been conserved. And its northern side, it's now undergoing conservation. The adaptive reuse of the Imperial kitchens is something that was in the news recently. This building was completed last year, and although it's not yet used except for cultural occasions and so on, not weddings. site visits and museums is something that we're looking at. Site visits and museums, we're looking at. The old museums are being evaluated by international experts. And only 2 days ago, there was a very important delegation that examined the existing museums. And we've been looking at whether or not the summer palace below the Sheesh Mahal can be used as a permanent exhibit or not. Recommendation on operations and management, the itineraries of tour visitors, various kinds of itineraries are being examined. Then the buffer zone around the fort has been defined. You know, the old buffer zone extended only 200 feet away from the historic monuments. Now we've got a whole section of the city included in the buffer zone. And included in it are also the Rim Market and Maryam Zamani Mosque, and there are moves to now move the Rim Market and develop that area. And you'll find interesting proposals in the book itself. And we hope to plan and carry out action programs in the buffer zone for socio-economic development. So this is the fort itself, and in relation to the city as a whole. And another important thing is we're trying to de-link, and we've already proposed it, de-link the Lahore fort from the Shalimar Gardens as two heritage sites, World Heritage sites that can exist independently of each other. And when that happens, we hope that the Badshahi Masjid and Huzuri Bagh and the Sikh complex would be included in a new World Heritage site. Then these are some illustrations of picture wall. This is the picture wall conserved. And lastly, I would encourage all of you to go and visit this gate, which is where the picture wall starts, after about 10 days. You will find this entire thing has been conserved and restored. And it's really very beautiful. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Masood Saab, for that wonderful introduction to the book. I'd just like to, before we move on, quickly introduce Mr. Kamran Lashari, a distinguished member of the Civil Services and a Federal Secretary from 1998 to 2003. Lashari Saab served as the first Director General of the Parks and Horticulture Authority, Lahore, and among many things was involved in the restoration of buildings on the Mall Road, including to Linton Market, as well as food streets such as those in Gawal Mandi and Purani Anarkali. In November 2003, he was appointed Chairman CDA and created new tourist sites in Islamabad such as Saidpur Village and Damne Ko. After he retired as Federal Secretary in 2012, he was appointed as the Director General of the Walled City of Lahore Authority, where he continues to work and is engaged in conservation activities and heritage tourism. Thank you so much, Mr. Lashari, for being here. So, I have a couple of questions for everyone on the panel today, but I will try to reserve the last 5 to 10 minutes for any questions the audience might have. And before I take a seat, Mr. Lashari, my first question is for you. Do you think what do you think some of the significant outcomes of the Walled City of Lahore Authority and the Arkhan Trust for Culture partnership are?
Thank you. First of all, I think it's a very significant thing to happen that a autonomous body, a dedicated body to a heritage area has been formed in Pakistan. This may not be true to many countries of the world either, in the sense that earlier on it was the municipal corporation and the LDA which looked after the affairs of the old city. But then the government realized its importance and created a new body called Walled City Lahore Authority, which has nothing else to do except to focus on the rehabilitation of the area existing within the 12 gates and the fort. Now, the other significant thing that happened is that we were able to bring back the Arkhan Trust for Culture, who had been there right from day one when it started as a project in 2006. So they were there till 2011 or 12, but I joined at the fag end of 2012, and to my consternation, I found that they had left the project and were not too happy with its frequent changes and whatever reasons. Masood Saab keep that as a well-kept secret. He doesn't let me know. But the fact remained that they had abandoned. And so now, if I take any credit, it is one, and that is to bring them back and lend confidence that we will move together. They started by their head office responding saying, the MOU is going to be for 6 months and we'll test you out and then see how does it go. Today it's more than 6 years and we have MOUs for another 6 years. And so I think this is a wonderful case study to see what can happen when good partnerships come in. You know, we couldn't have, as a government body, done this kind of specialization, attained UNESCO award and things like that. And similarly, they wouldn't have been able to move much further. And they already had, as I said, given up on the project. The best thing is how you build partnerships and see where the best resource exists and value it and bring it together. And that produces wonderful results. And then what we could add on was revitalization part, bringing in where I think if I have little niche or a forte, it is in festivities, events, and cultural regeneration. So we brought in a directorate of culture, marketing, and tourism, which never existed in the format. And so it's not only conservation. The good thing that has happened is that it's brought walled city, at least one corner of it, brought to life. And instead of just showing the nature, the mountains created by Allamia, or the monuments created by the Mughals, we can also show the streets of Lahore and the mahallas of Lahore and the richness and the vibrancy and the color in a nice, organized manner.
Thank you, Lashari Saab. Nayyar, my next question is for you. Can you speak a little bit about the benefits of adaptive reuse and how, especially in today's time, and how such projects can be incentivized or encouraged in Pakistan?
In our economic situation,
The mic.
which has become a permanent sort of a tradition, it hasn't improved and doesn't seem that it is improving. So we'll always face this problem of being able to afford all this. And cities, old city areas like this cannot be made into museums which cannot be maintained. So we have to see for solutions of sustainability where we can maintain them, we can sustain them. And for that, this adaptive reuse philosophy is used, because otherwise we won't be able to sustain them. That is how, and then also we are looking for living traditions. Tradition is, good tradition is which can continue. The effort of just documentation and mummification of history is not good enough. And the excellent example I would like to quote that in Lionel Kipling established in 1875 Mayo School of Arts, and Sayyid Babar Ali established Naqsh School of Art in Bhati Darwaza in Mubarak Haveli. That's a remarkable example. I've been personally in touch, and the school is blooming and prospering, and training people in crafts, living crafts which are now going ahead in modern times, which were buried earlier. So that is the spirit that should be there, and this is an example of adaptive reuse.
Thank you, Nayyar Saab. Christoph, my next question is for you, and I'm just going to read a paragraph from the book. On page 313 of the book, in the chapter about the conservation of the picture wall, you state, and I quote, "In the context of the picture wall, conservation reversibility may be understood as retreatability, a concept that provides for intervention that does not damage the original material and that would accept another cycle of conservation in the future." Can you please expand a little bit on this concept of reversibility and compatibility?
So this is a very detailed question. First of all, maybe we should just tell that this book has been a wonderful journey in the last 13 years of history, and tells the story of let's say, a wonderful partnership, and the fact that we are very thankful to Pakistan to have been welcoming our organization to carry out some work. Because we are, so before talking about technical, to address technical questions, it's true that it talks about past work, and it also opens to new works, because nothing is mummified, and heritage conservation is perceived by His Highness the Arkhan, and our organization is the instrumental tool of his vision, as an improvement of living conditions. Living conditions meaning not only living conditions of residents, but also of visitors and all civil society, you see? And so we all act in different capacities. As architects, I can probably explain you what is the question of reversibility, retreatability, because in conservation, you always wonder, I mean, what does it mean to restore a monument? You can restore, you can maintain, you can renew. There are lots of different terms to tell a story. In fact, conserving a monument is also a way, let's say, to transmit it to the next generation. So it's a project. It's viewed as a vehicle for the future. So reversibility means that, I mean, humans are serving a monument, and at their small scale of intervention compared to the long scale of history, there should not be any mistakes done. And if there are any, let's say, daily, we know that, for instance, 100 years ago, people used cement. We used cement in buildings, and everyone thought it was a good practice because it was strong, efficient. Today, we have a totally different view. We believe that cement is detrimental to breathing of brick masonry, of plasters, of natural material, and we try to apply lime plasters, more sympathetic solutions. And this shows that we are dependent on our context, economic, cultural context, and we should not think that we are, let's say, able to change the world from one day to the next. So reversibility is also a concept where there is a belief that, I mean, history will not end with one restoration, but it should be opened for the next one. And materials should not, let's say, be totally sterilized.
Thank you, Christoph. Masuda, my next question is for you. Can you please tell us some of the key features of the Walled City of Lahore Act 2012 and why this legislation was so important?
You asked me to describe a legal document like an act to you. And there can't be any key features in an act, because it is one, corpus, and every component of a law acts in conjunction with each other. You can't pluck one out, and that would be bad practice. You can't pluck a piece of the law out and apply it to a situation. Imagine that the rest doesn't exist. But nevertheless, one of the things that comes to my mind, which is quite striking about this law, is the way it defines heritage. And of course, the lawyers who wrote it, you'll find problems with the English and problem with the syntax and all that sort of thing. But it is the most comprehensive definition of heritage and urban heritage that I've found in many literatures across the world, because it includes tangible, intangible, it includes buildings, ways of construction, materials, manner of use. It goes on and on and on. Open spaces, streets, building characteristics, individual piece of architecture, group of buildings forming forming group value, as it's called, which may not be very high architecture, but still they are valuable in their togetherness, and so on. And this is something that if you try to apply these definitions to real life situations, you find that it is a real task. You need to have very, very good methods to deal with that. And those methods employ regulation, they employ identification, listing, ways in which different kinds of heritage can be listed or should be listed, and the way each type of listing has to be dealt with, and so on. The third important thing is in this law is the notion of zones of special value, and it is a concept derived from French tradition. What do you call it? Sector sauvegarde.
From the sector.
Yeah. And but that is usually applied to a city as a whole or a part of a city as a whole in France. But here we had a city where there were pockets of things of special value, and the rest had already been built over and transmogrified and changed and so on. So these pockets had to be identified as something that needed to be dealt with special care, with special regulative effort, with special engagement with the community, and so on. And you find stuff about it in the book.
Thank you, Masood Saab.
Okay, can I go on a little bit?
Yes.
I was, Salima, before you start packing up and leaving, I was listening to Salima's book. There's a panel just before this, Lashari Saab, and some very, very exciting concepts of modernity and tradition were presented. And there was this very, very interesting aspect of the softness with which tradition transforms or can transform itself into contemporary existence in our lives, and how what we do with the tradition as either something that we defer to and respect or something that we reject can actually inform our lives and our children's lives in the future. This is something that applies wholeheartedly, not just to art and fine art. In this case, I think my eyes opened wide, because it was a concept from our walled city that Salima had written about in her book, and which this wonderful French guy, is he French, had translated into Urdu. The discussion that happened was really something that I wish all of us had listened to, because there were people like Mayor Froze, क्या नाम है उनका? Arfa Sayyeda, and Khalid Ahmed, and Salima herself, and there's some gentleman called Nasir Abbas. It was wonderful, wonderful. But to go back, I think it's extremely important that we realize that some things in everything, there are some in the walled city and all historical contexts, there are things that are changing, have already changed, and in the process of changing, that are still more or less like what they were, and they all have their own intrinsic heritage value, which is either high or low or whatever. What do you do when things, you're dealing with things of that admixture? And how do you make sense of a context like that to produce coherent and cohesive pieces of your work that can preserve a city and that can represent the city in its true worth? I just remembered, maybe you can speak to it, by recalling people like Giovannoni and their work, and the fact that you can edit a city out,
There's a long tradition of city rehabilitation in different countries. It is what I notice in Lahore especially is that, the economic forces and in a vibrant city make it challenging to restore physical assets and improve living conditions. You see, this is the in the European cities. You probably have noticed they become, let's say, a little bit mummified because of being transformed into urban centers where there are offices and not anymore residents. And I think this is the value of working in cities which are vibrant and full of life, is that, we cannot work in isolation between tangible and intangible issues. This is my perspective, having worked with different contexts.
So we're running out of time, and even though I have a lot of questions for you, but I would like to give the audience the opportunity if they have any questions.
I'm Ajaz Ahmed. I'm a mechanical engineer from NUST, and I did masters in energy engineering. SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 7, is about clean and cheap energy. We have seen in the past smoke has worst hit Lahore, mainly because of the thermal power plants surrounded the city. And in international markets, we have seen solar and wind and renewable energy prices have gone down 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And whereas you're buying very expensive electricity, very expensive energy, 14 to 15 cents in LESCO. So are you factoring in the clean and cheap energy options in your planning and sustainable development of the project?
I think the question is a very appropriate one for these times. There's no doubt about it. But the problem is that this question relates to the macro dimension, these are things that we could have started planning 30 years ago. And we have Makran Coast and all that.
Let me just add one more thing. Municipal solid waste. It is considered as black gold in Scandinavian countries. They import municipal solid waste. And in Lahore, we have 5,000 to 6,000 tons per day municipal solid waste. And instead of making electricity out of it, we can generate 20 megawatt. 1 megawatt means 3 crores rupees electricity per year. Instead of generating electricity out of it, we spent 14 billion rupees on cleaning the Lahore, that too from two Turkish company, Ospak and Al Barak, and we can't produce electricity out of our waste.
But this is also, as I said, slightly out of context, in the sense that we'll be dealing with heritage and an old city and so on. Although I don't know whether it will be, we have the time to even answer a question like that here. Thank you for asking it, though.
I'm Alia. I just want to know, are you, as your larger plan, also educating the inhabitants of the inner city as to how to improve their environment themselves? Because you will leave eventually and they will be left to their own devices, which are not very nice at the moment.
I'd like to respond to this. We have a very strong side of this, which is a social mobilization team. We have formed CBOs, which is community-based organizations. And when the World Bank assessed our efforts in the walled city on our project area, they said the most significant part is the social mobilization. Because in such projects, according to them, you may have the funds, you may have the expertise, and still you do not find much headway because you're going into a very dense area where communities are very well entrenched and traditional living for centuries. And it's not easy to move ahead. But I must say that in my department, one area where I feel proud about are the young boys and girls who are trained in this. And they go into houses and they talk to them, they prepare their mind. Even when we are working for, let's say, a property, and I say, "Acha bhai, ye kaam abhi tak kyun nahi ho raha?" So I get to hear, "Sir, ye abhi property socially clear nahi hui." So first they have to be socially cleared by talking to them, why we are doing this, till how long will we do this, and what are the hours, etc. Because for them, those small gully mohallas are their entire living. So one is this. The other side on which we are building up is instilling the civic sense. Now we are creating competitions between mohallas and between shopkeepers, and we are saying that you will get the best mohalla will get this prize, we'll take him to the chief secretary or chief minister and declare this, that. So I'm just talking the project area, which is just about 8% of the walled city. We haven't worked very extensively, but wherever we have worked, it is very, very intensive work. And so yes, we are in very close liaison with the communities. It's a very difficult community. I call them like Fata in Lahore, walled city. It's like a tribal area. So in the morning, they embrace you, Gujarat, tuade varga koi hai nahi. In the evening, they whip out a pistol and they say, "Oh, koi aayega to dekh lenge." So they're a world of their own, But wonderful people, and we are working very closely with them.
I think we can take one more question.
My name is Hussain, and my question is for Lashari Saab. So the walled city, the fort, and the Badshahi Mosque has been under the jurisdiction of the archaeology department for a long time before the WCLA took over. And in that period of time, the walled city never saw this scale of restoration and conservation work. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, through the WCLA, are you hoping to establish a template for developmental conservation that can be practiced across the board and across the country?
See, in one sense, we are glad that despite it's been a slow thing for the last many years, we have reached only to 7-8% of the walled city. But a very well-established model has come in position. So this can be replicated anywhere. Now the government has taken the decision to declare walled city Lahore as the walled cities of Punjab authority. And very soon we will have a footprint at two places. One is Bhera and one is Multan, with the same model, which means not only one building, but the whole mohalla's rehabilitation. Having said that, you'll be happy to know that walled city is no longer walled. We are unwalled now. We are in the region of Balochistan, working at the Fort Sandaman in District Zob. We are working in Muzaffarabad, the Red Fort in Muzaffarabad. This small little organization is engaged at Okada also for the restoration of the monument of Mir Chakar Khan Rind. And the two churches now have been added in Lahore, the St. Anthony's and the other one the cathedral. So there's a lot of, coming on the plate, but it scares me as well because the perception has been developed through the Arkhan people, but we have to live up to it. We are working closely, building our capacities, and hopefully we should be able to do it at many other places.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our session. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for your time.